Now, let's talk about dynamically sized arrays. We use dynamic arrays when we don't know the number of elements of the array at compile time. There are three types of dynamic arrays. Arrays that contain bytes elements, arrays that contain unsigned integers or integers, and arrays that contain a sequence of characters and that is a string, which is UTF-8 encoded. As a rule of thumb, it's recommended to use bytes for arbitrary length raw data and string for arbitrary length string data. If we know at compile time the number of elements in the array, it is much cheaper to use a fixed size array like bytes 1 to bytes 32 instead of a dynamic byte array. This type of data, a dynamic array, has two members: length, that returns the number of elements in the array, and the push function that adds a new element to the array and returns the number of elements. Let's see an example with dynamic arrays. First, I create a string variable. This is a dynamic array. So, string, the visibility specifier, let's say public, and now the location, the name of the variable. If I want to initialize this variable at declaration time, I can specify the string between single quotes. So let's say London. Later, I can change the value of this state variable using a setter function. And then I want to keep for this property a history of prices. I have a price for this property. After that, the price changes and I want to update the price keeping the old value. For that, I don't know how many prices I will have. I must declare a dynamic array. The price is an unsigned integer, then come the brackets, the visibility specifier public, and then prices. On line number 6, I declared a dynamic array named prices. Let's see how can we add elements to this array. So I create a function named addPrice. This function has one argument, the price that will be added to the array, so unsigned integer price. My function is public. It can be called from any other application. And now inside my function, I write prices dot push. Push is a member of a dynamic array and the new element that will be added. This is the function argument, underline price. Let's deploy this contract. The contract has been deployed. And now, if I want to see the location will be automatically returned because it's public. And my dynamic array named prices can also be returned because it's public without a getter. So if I want to see the first element of this variable, of this array, I write here the index of that element and I press on prices. I got an error because there is no element in this array. I can add elements to this array simply by calling the addPrice function. So I add the price, let's say 55. Now the array has one element. I add another price, a new price, 88. Now the array has two elements. If I want to see the first element of the array, I write the index 0 because it starts from 0 and I can see the value of 55. The second element of the array will be at index 1, is the value 88. And if I want to see the third element of the array, this means index 2, I will get an error because my array has only 2 elements. If I want to see how many elements do I have in an array, I can write a function get length this function doesn't modify any state variable, this means it's a view function, returns a variable of type unsigned integer, and inside the function I write return prices dot length. Good. I deploy the contract one more time, and now I press on get length. As we can see, there is no element inside the array. If I add, let's say, one price, the second price, the third price, my array has 3 elements. Okay, here is length n. No problem. Okay, let's see how can we return an element from this dynamic array, from a specific index. So function get element. This function has one argument, an unsigned integer named index. It will return the element from that index. It's only a view function. It doesn't modify the blockchain, so any state variable. And I must specify what it will return. So returns, it returns an element, and an element is of type unsigned integer. So it returns an unsigned integer. And now here, return prices square brackets index. So it returns the element from that index. I delete this deployment to have more space here. And now I deploy the contract. Okay, I add a price, I add a second price, and I want to get an element from position 0, from index 0 is 33. I want to return the second element. Okay, and now I want to return the third element, and I've got an error. Why? Because my dynamic array has only 2 elements. What can we do? Inside this function, get element, we must verify that the index is not greater than the maximum available index. So something like that, it would be better. If index less than prices dot length. Okay, this is the solidity if. This is a test. What does it mean? If my array has 7 elements, so prices dot length returns 7, my index must be maximum 6, because 6 means the 7th element, the last element of the array. Okay, let's try it one more time. I deploy the contract. I add one price, the second price, and I want the third element. As we can see, there is no error. Yeah, the function didn't return an error. The function has been executed without an error. Okay, my function didn't return an element because there is no element there, but there is no error. If we want to delete an element of a dynamic array, we must do it manually. There is no dedicated method. So let's see how can we delete an element from a dynamic array, from a specific index. For that, I'll create a function, let's say function delete element from an unsigned index. This function is public and it returns a Boolean variable. It returns false if it couldn't delete the element, and it returns true if it deleted the element without error. Okay, first we must check that index is inside the valid range. So we don't use an out of index value. So if index greater than or equal to prices dot length, return false. So if I use an index that is greater than or equal to the total elements of the array, the function returns. Else, using a for, I will move every element of my array to the left, one position to the left, from that index till to the end. For inside I equals index. I start from that index to move elements to the left. I is less than prices dot length I plus plus. I increment the I variable. And now here I simply write prices square brackets I equals prices square brackets I plus 1. What does it mean? It means that I will move every element from my index to the left, one position. And I must decrement the length of the array. So prices dot length minus minus. My array will have one element less. That's all. Let's check the function. I delete the deployments. I deploy the contract one more time. There is no error, no problem. Here I forgot to return true. So if I get to this point, this means that there was no error. I return true because it must return a Boolean variable. I delete all deployments here to have more space. I deploy the contract and I add 3 elements. So let's say 1, 2, and 3. 3 elements with values of 1, 2, and 3. Okay, this is the first element, value 1. This is the second element, and this is the third element. The third element, sorry, with index 2. And now I want to delete the second element. The second element is the element with index 1. And we've got an error that I did on purpose because this is very common error. Here we must have I less than prices dot length minus 1. Why is that? Let's take an example. Let's suppose our dynamic array has 5 elements and I is 3. When I is 3, here I will access the last element of the array. So prices square brackets 4. So this is the last loop inside this 4. I must be less than 4. Prices dot length is 5 because I have 5 elements, minus 1, 4. I don't go further. For example, if I would go one value further and I would be 4, here I will have prices square brackets 5. And this is an error, an out of index error. This is the right solution. I'm glad I had this error because this is a very common error and it's good for you to see something like that in my examples. Okay, I try it one more time. I deploy the contract. I add 3 values. Let's say another values, value 11, 12, 13. And I want to delete the second element. The second element means the element from index 1, there is no error, transaction mined and execution succeed. My array has now 2 elements. Let's check it. Okay, how many elements does my array have? 2. What is the first element? 11. What is the second element? 13. What is the third element? There is no such a third element. This is how we delete an element from a dynamic array.